Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Random Heathen Ramblings podcast, where we discuss all sorts of things Germanic heathenry related. My name is Jesse. I am your host. Let's get into it. Well, all right. Dan, here we go. Lighting is starting to correct itself. Hail and welcome back, everyone, to this week's episode of the Random Heathen Ramblings podcast, a Midgard Musings production. I am your host, Jesse. Thank you so much for tuning in here today and being a part of this every week and sharing your thoughts, sharing your comments, sharing the videos, liking them, upvoting them, whatever it is that you do, however it is that you engage with the various platforms when these sorts of things come out. It is greatly appreciated. And there goes my camera as I so violently kick it out of the way. That's rude, Jesse. Don't do that. For all my listeners that aren't on the camera platforms, they're just like, what happened? Well, I just kicked the camera a little bit and it bumped me a little bit out of frame. But we are mainly good now. We are sort of good. We're as good as it gets over here on the podcast. So you may be wondering what this title, what the podcast episode verbiage means, and I will get into that here in just a moment. But before we do, I would like to call all of your attention to the Linktree link that is annotated in the description of this video and in the show notes of this podcast. That Linktree link will give you all of the places that you can find me on social media, as well as some other ways that you can support what I do. You can buy merchandise through Spring. You can become a patron on Patreon. That is a bit of a mess right now, and I am needing to revamp some things when it comes to Patreon because, well, it's a platform that I have out here, and I don't do a whole lot with it. But that will hopefully change soon. I'm trying to come up with some better ways of engagement on that platform since it's been out there for so long, but I very rarely do anything with it. But anyway, it's down there. If you want to check it out, you can monetarily support this podcast for as little as $1 a month. I don't think you can do anything of interest or of support for $1 or a pound, as they say in the UK, a month. So, all that stuff is in the Linktree link. Be sure to check it out, share it around, share this around, and so that's about all there is to handle on the housekeeping front. So, this week's podcast, first of all, is brought to you by Anchor.fm, and Spotify, and everybody else. So, not a sponsor, but it is who I do my stuff through. But anyway, this week's topic of discussion, I say in the title or in the title and the thumbnail, right? I am Norse Pagan, or am I? Now that may raise some questions, the last three words, or am I? Am I really Norse Pagan? I think that's a fair question to ask because it's probably something of similar questions or a similar question that gets asked by individuals to themselves about themselves in some sort of way, right? Am I this? Am I what I say I am? Is the label that is put upon me, whether I place it upon myself or whether it's placed upon me by others, or whether it's just a generic term, is this the most accurate label that could be placed upon me, that could be put upon me, or is this the best description out there? Now, if you guys listened to last week's episode and saw the Heathenry 101 thing, I went into some descriptions talking about this specific religious path or this specific path of spirituality, and kind of touched upon very lightly some of the various names that it's known by. And I mentioned, Norse paganism or Norse heathenry, Germanic paganism, Germanic polytheism, also true, right? Than some of these other ones. And you know, there are some labels. We're just going to call that. We're just going to call it labels for the sake of this episode and for the sake of argument, right? Because I know, um, excuse me, I know that a lot of people dislike labels. You know, they dislike the term of this or that thing or the other because of whatever reason. I mean, a lot of people have different reasons, but they choose to define themselves or be known as something without a label, or they're pretty ambiguous, maybe the right term, or a bit anonymous. I don't know. It's open ended, right? Like there's no real specific label to what people want to be known as, and that's fair. But you know, for the sake of this podcast and for the sake of the audience, right? We're gonna call what I'm talking about labels. So, am I a Norse pagan? I say I am. I do a lot of what I do in the vein of what Norse paganism would encompass, right? Whether it be aesthetic, ritualistically, um, spiritually. Norse paganism is probably a fair label to put on what I do. My imagery, again, my aesthetic, how I dress, how I decorate. There's a lot of that decor. The aesthetic is there. Um, but I do want to talk about something that came up recently that I'm always thinking, right? I'm always taking what a lot of what you guys say, and using your feedback, using the material that becomes conversation, on different things that I post on my various platforms, and I listen. I don't always respond directly. I may not always reply directly. I try to stay engaged as much as I can, with things, and there are some times that the conversation goes off into realms of detail and granularity that I just don't have time to spend in my phone, on my computer, just typing things out. It does get tedious. It does become time consuming, believe it or not. And I have a life. I have a home. I have a social life. I have my wife. I have my family time. I have my work. I have all these things that everybody else has, of course. And on top of that, being a content creator and a podcaster, right, doing all the things to stay in the views of my supporters, my friends, my fans, everybody that makes what I do possible. And so I come here once a week and I ramble on about things that for me is a bit cathartic because I can address some of the more deep stuff, right? Some of the more granular stuff, and I can respond in ways that I feel are deserving of the type of conversation that those comments and whatnot generate. And so, am I a Norse pagan? This was not this wasn't a question that was posed on a thread anywhere to me. And there wasn't really anything about this particular conversation that caused me to question whether I am what I either have been labeled as or what I fall under a certain category of being. This comment that kind of triggered this podcast episode, and the comment thread that ensued from it, it really just kind of put me in a frame of mind of kind of opening up the feeling that I had to a larger audience and to get some uh, engagement on it, and to get some feedback on it, because again, so much of what I do here is fueled by what you guys and gals out here are listening and watching respond to. And so we're going to jump into it. There's going to be some things popping up for those that are on the video platforms. There's going to be some things popping up here on screen that will probably land right over here somewhere. Um, Screenshots of comments of things. And I'm not going to redact anything because the comment thread is on the Midgard Musings Facebook page. I'm going to be linking that post um, down in the description and in the show notes. So for everybody that does follow me on Facebook, if you missed it, you want to go back and you want to see and you want to weigh in yourself, please feel free to do so. It's going to be linked in, like I said, in the description and in the show notes. But you're going to be seeing some stuff, though, for those, again, that are watching. Screenshots I'm going to be posting up on screen here regarding what I'm talking about. So this post that I made Sunday, I think it was. It was over this past weekend. So we're going almost into a week or so ago, and some of the screenshots you're going to see have dated it 2 or 3 days ago. But that's at the time of me capturing them. So at this point in time, we're close to 5 days, 4 or 5 days, in the past. So the post in itself was on a jawbone piece. I crafted something out of a deer jawbone, the jawbone of a deer, right? A few weeks ago, 2-3 weeks ago maybe, if that, my wife was out driving around. Her and I like to do this Pokemon Go thing, Pogo, right? So she was out just driving around. I was at work. She was out driving around, and she was driving around in an area that it's a pretty wooded area, and she was just doing her pogo thing, and drove by this one area where she noticed what she thought was a large concentrated growth area of fungus mushrooms and such, and she was like, "Ooh, what's that?" So she stopped, and turns out it was bones, a pile of bones, quite a large pile of bones, and best that we can determine, it was the remains of a deer. But I'm talking like dozens of rib bones, a whole spine, including the tail, some femurs and other leg bones, and a jawbone, which is again what was used to make this piece that I'm talking about. So the piece is literally this. It's a jawbone made with bells and beads and some rawhide leather binding and whatnot. And first of all, it got a very big response to people. Like, I mean, there's all kinds of comments, reactions, shares, and whatnot. But I'm calling attention to one individual's particular comment, which again, because it's a public thing, I'm not redacting any information because it's going to be linked down here so everybody can go and see it. And I have no reason to, right? There's nothing nefarious going on here. But it's this comment popping up here on screen, and it says, "Is this a ritual tool of personal praxis, or is it rooted in something historically heathen?" Great question. First of all, just want to say great question. Secondly, I want to follow up. I do respond to that, so I say it is for my personal practice. But before I go further into this, I do just want to say that I have never, in the years that I have been putting out content, whether it be just, my Midgard Musing stuff, or whether it be the last 3, now going on, this is the 4th season of the Random Heathen Ramblings podcast, in whatever form or fashion of content that I have released, I have never once positioned myself out here or on any platform as being a reconstructionist or historical reconstructionist heathen or person. I do hold a very high, in very high esteem, the value behind what is historically documented, and I love learning things of history. And there's so much to learn, and there's so many things that through that learning you uh, change throughout time. As new discoveries are made and as new uh, evidence is provided through archaeological and scientific research, there's a lot of growth and a lot of evolution that happens throughout that. So, but to be fair, and just to put it out here on the record, I am not what I would refer to as a hardcore Reconstructionist heathen. My heathen practices, the heathen practices surrounding the tribe that I am tied to and with, and some of the friends that are closely connected to our inner circle, right, are our tribal our customs, our traditions, laws, if you will, aren't so much as laws as like concrete laid down, at least not yet, because the tribe is young. There is again growth and things that happen, but there's uh when it comes to like how we not how but when we observe certain holy tides, yes, that is rooted in historical fact, at least to the degree that we have right now, right? So when we hold Yule is the historically backing, or what is historically backed up as when pre-Christian Yule was held. Same way for like Sigerblot, Winter Nights, etc. But when it comes to a lot of other things, like we're still figuring things out. We're not deeply rooted in historically, like we're not so stuck in the roots. We're not so root bound that we are limiting ourselves to growth, because the growth happens above ground. The roots are where the anchor point is. The roots are where the everything is centered around. But growth happens above ground, right? It happens. Yes, the roots grow and they sink in deeper, but I'm talking about like the flourishing, the growth, the expansion. Everything happens above ground. So we take that, and I take that, and even with my personal practices, um, take some of the stuff from what I've learned or what I am learning throughout historical research and other things of that nature, and put it into practice within our tribal construct. And so there's a healthy blend of the old and the new, and it's a big thing for me, and it's been kind of the, I guess, mantra, if you will. I mean, you guys see it at the end of every podcast, or at least here recently you do. Practicing old ways in modern times, finding the application of things that were done in old ways heathenry and arch heathen times, and finding its practical use and its practicality in modern times. I'm not a hardcore recon. So when I get questions like this, is what you're doing, based on personal, uh, or is it for personal practice, or does it have any roots in actual historical heathenry? Um, again, this type of question always makes me go, well, I guess yes and no, right? I mean, it's not a hard yes or a hard no. There is some of what I do and some of what I am doing that has backing in it, but it's not the reason why I do it, right? And I want to, before I get into more of this topic or this conversation, I want to bring up one of the things that I hold very important and very necessary for me is purpose and the why. If if I were to just abandon all of what I feel, if I were to just abandon the intuitions, the things that I know have worked for me, and if I were to just abandon that and just go strictly based off of hardcore, historically backed information, nothing against people that do. For me, I feel like I would lose touch of the purpose. I would lose touch of the why. Because, and I'll tell you the reason why. It's because I, again, hold value to what information we have that is historically backed. I also know that so much of what is historically backed has changed over the years, and it's going to continue to change. We're going to find new things. We're going to discover new things. So it's an evolutionary thing. It's a work in progress. It's a living thing. It's not, well, they did it that way 1,500 years ago, so that's how we have to do it now. And then in 10 years, we go, well, maybe they didn't quite do it that way 1,500 years ago. Maybe they did it in a little bit different way because we dug up something. Somebody in Norway, somebody in Denmark, somebody in Sweden, somebody somewhere dug up something that suggests otherwise. And then all of a sudden, we're doing things differently again. So, again, I find value and I find a purpose for what there is in historically backed information, but I don't stay there. I don't reside there. And so when people ask me, is what you're doing, is it for personal practice or is there anything backed around it historically? My answer is going to be a blend of the two. So I do respond. I say it's for my personal practice, but I ask them. I said, could you direct me and others looking to find valid historical sources that support that bones were used in ritual? Now, here's where things get to be a little messy, and I apologize for this. It's not my fault. It's the way that the platform kind of orders the when comments come through. So for those that are watching, listening, right, when you click on the link that is annotated and you go back to this conversation thread, you may have to change your comments because Facebook automatically is going to categorize most recent comments as being what gets seen first. So you're not going to see all comments. You're going to have to go in there, drill down a little bit, click on that thing that says most recent context, and click all comments to see some of what I'm talking about. And some of these things are going to be screenshotted and put up on the screen for you to see. But, and again, this is going to require me to kind of drill down a bit through here and point out my responses to things. But suffice that to say, so again, I tell them about what it is. It's a personal thing. And again, change it to all comments. It goes by most relevant. So let me go back to change it to all comments. You guys just bear with me. All right, here we go. Replies. All right, so I say yes, it's a personal practice thing, but where could we find more information about the use of bones, specifically bones, that were used in ritual? This person responds and says, well, I'm not aware, it should be up here somewhere, not aware of extensive use of bone charms, per se. I'm aware that the arch-heathens believed that the soul lived within the bones, and I think Road to Hell by R.H. Ellis Davidson covers that. I'm going to pause for just a minute. I have gone through and gleaned most of the Road to Hell, which is, again, a very highly recommended source for the concepts of the dead and the afterlife, a Germanic concept, or Norse concepts of the dead and the afterlife. Very highly recommended material. I suggest anybody heathen want that, should get a copy of that. But the part here where it says that the soul lived within the bones, I'm going to venture off to say here that the concept of the soul as a singular thing only happened after Christianity became the norm in Scandinavia specifically. I don't think that the concept of the soul was limited to a singular thing, like where you say the soul lived in the bones. I'll have to go back and read through The Road to Hell. I have a digital PDF copy of it, and so it's gonna take some time for me to go back through it. But if pre-Christian heathens, if arch-heathens had a concept of what happens to us when we die, and it was linked as being just one concept of the soul, I don't think that Davidson's research and stuff in The Road to Hell support that. So there may have been a part of the soul, an element of the soul, whether it be the huger, the thought, right, or the hummer, the physical part of yourself that exists or remains in the bones. And again, without going back and reading through that, I know that at least in those times, that the soul, the concept of the soul was multifaceted. It was a multi-part. You had the hammer, you had the filia, you had the huger, you had the Hamingia. You had all these various parts that constitute what the soul is. So your soul, your spirit is not tied to just one particular thing. There's parts of the soul that reside certain places, that are able to go certain places. This was what I'm pretty sure Davidson's research and stuff from the Road to Hell support, that the soul is not tied to just one thing. I can't say for sure, and I'm not going to say that 100% assuredly, but for anybody that has The Road to Hell, The Road to Hell by H.R. Ellis Davidson, and knows better, feel free to comment. So, one other thing, in terms of this bone charms being used, I'm going to also annotate something. This image right here, this is a reconstructed image of what is known as the shaman of Bad Durenberg. If I'm mispronouncing that, oh well. But the shaman of Bad Durenberg, this image is a reconstructed image. I believe it's a reconstructed image of a woman, a young middle-aged woman, who existed some, I want to say, like between 5,000 to 7,000 years ago in an area of the world and during an age that was part of Saxony. I'm going to link something in the show notes and in the description for you guys to read more about it. But clearly, the remains of this shaman, of this woman, were discovered in, I think it was a bog or something. Anyway, they were unearthed, they were discovered. And with the remains of this person were bones and other artifacts. And there's all kinds of bones. There's crane, there's beaver, there's all kinds of things of bone remnants that were buried with this person. And the shamans, in many cultures are highly esteemed, highly respected people, right, for having mastered skills of healing through medicine, through ritual trance, through various methods. And so when we find remains like this of people who were buried with certain items, then chances are the reason why they were buried with them is because they were used in their everyday practices, or at least in their regular everyday practices, right? They were someone of a high esteem in their society, that they wanted those things that that the person used in their everyday to day life to carry with them into the afterlife. And it is largely believed and speculated that these bones were part of ritual attire. So jawbones, teeth, whatever other parts of the body of the animal that were used in, whether it would be a headdress or whether it be some sort of adornment, right? Bones were used. So this is clearly one particular thing that predates Christianity in the North, right? It's, again, dated to be during whatever I don't know, whatever it is. I'm going to put it up here on the screen, that this age, okay, this age, it's old. It's really, really old. And it's in Saxony, or Saxon lands of Saxony. So there's some evidence for you that highly suggests that bones had a place in that region's spiritual practices. I made some comments that lead to a person or that lead to this person saying that I'm curious how it is that you feel about the guarding of sacral spaces, objects, and accesses. We have some evidence, like in the accounts of Bede, that shows that showing the contents of your hearth cult to Utgard was a quote-unquote taboo, or was a taboo. I'd find it likely that in modern practices, heathens would only break this taboo for academic reasons, as reconstruction may require. Sure, that's a fair statement. And so, but here's kind of my response to some of this, and I allude to this in a comment saying that I don't when it comes to sharing things of sacredness, right? Sacral space, sacred objects, right? I mean, this was a piece of a deer bone that I crafted and said this is a ritual piece that I made. I hadn't used it yet in ritual. It was a work in progress, and I was just sharing the crafting of it, right? I don't film. I shouldn't say I don't share what is filmed of any sort of a ritual nature, right? If I'm doing ritual, whether it be personal hearth cult stuff or whether it be on a larger scale, if anything gets filmed, it doesn't get shared publicly in the moment, right? I don't film a ritual. Nothing gets filmed that gets shared for the public to see because it may be filmed or may be documented for, again, for research purposes, for my own references to go back and say, that was something I wanted maybe do different or whatever. And we have these tools available to us now that I think, if it had been existing in ancient times, may have been leveraged and may have been used. Can we say that for sure? Is that speculation? Absolutely, 100%. Right? We do know, we do get a sense of the like what he's talking about here, or what this person's talking about here, of the there being penalties to sharing these sorts of things to the outside, to what he says, Utgard, the outer layer. So you have Innengard, Utgard, inner yard, outer yard. There was a pretty clear, like, lines were drawn, barriers were defined. You know what I mean? Sacred space was defined as sacred space, and what was beyond and what was without that was not. And so we see some examples. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about this as I go through some of the comments, that certain and very specific things were kept 100% withdrawn from the outside. In other words, they were only for the household. They were only for the families, and it was something very private, and so it wasn't shared abroad. And I appreciate and I find that there is value to be placed on that. So this particular comment, I had said that I don't film or record any rituals being done in the moment when I'm doing it. I already said this. But to the point that I said that what was taboo in medieval Scandinavia or before is what it was for the time, and that we aren't living in those times. So my counter argument to this person's comment, or I guess my counter, it wasn't necessarily an argument. It was discussion, right? Debate, healthy debate. When you bring up things like taboo, I first of all think mostly, I think, and this may be just my jumping the gun or my assumptions, but I'm wondering if people think this too. When we hear the word taboo, right, we're thinking of social taboos. We're not necessarily thinking of things of a religious or spiritual nature, things that were taboo or not to be done, right, because of religious consequences or for reasons that could negatively impact you from a religious or spiritual nature. I think most of us think of taboos as things that just didn't jive for the society at the time. So we're talking about social taboos. But there are religious taboos amongst certain cultures and amongst certain belief systems, right? It is taboo for the Muslims and Christians to eat pork, for instance, or maybe not Christians per se. I know Christianity does adopt some Judeo-Abrahamic beliefs, which is, again, the Jews don't eat pork, and neither do Muslims. But we're going to get into that in just a minute. But so there you go. There's a religious taboo. It is against divine law to do XYZ, and that's where the religious taboo comes in. So I say that, right, in their response, and that's going to be The comment that gets put up here is that so you don't think it was a matter of orthopraxy when Bede's source was chased away at Alphablot. Why should we not mind the taboos of the arch-heathens if they were, I guess he meant to say if they were, the last ones to have divine contact? A higher, an aeropophany. An aeropophany. Is that right? That word. What is the exact inspiration of the item? Looks Sami, which is a different mystical and ritual tradition, one that only overlapped with the arch-heathens' practice in small amounts and in a minority of places. So let me back up, right? Talking about Bede's source being chased away at Alphablot. I want to call attention to the fact that at the time of my response to this, if you guys are going to go back and read the comments, at the time of my response to this, the comment said when Bede was chased away at Alphablot. You'll notice that there are edits being made to this. It says edited somewhere, which means the author made some changes. That's fine. Sometimes you misspeak. Sometimes you say things. Sometimes you got to change what you're going to say. I get that, and it's okay. So I'm thinking that at this point in time, what they were trying to say was that there was the source that Bede was using to talk about Alphablot. And again, I'm not the best person to talk to about what Bede says, the Venerable Bede. I know that that's considered to be either a primary or secondary source for a lot of mainland Germanic heathenry, Saxon heathenry. But it's, there's Christian bias. There has to be Christian bias because he was a freaking, I don't know, bishop or something, right? So anyway, there's talk of Bede's source being chased away at Alphablot. To which I had said that I'm not familiar with nobody being chased away at Alphablot, but I don't argue the fact that it happened because Alphablot was clearly only a family affair held by the Swedes. I believe the Swedes held it privately. Maybe it was the Norwegians. Somebody in Scandinavia, it was the Scandinavians that at the time Alphablot, which was a winter nights sort of thing, was a bloat to the Alfar. Now, some might say it was a bloat to the elves. Others might say that it is ancestral, Alfar being the male ancestors. But either way, it was a private affair, and so anybody happening by mistake or uninvited, was quickly dealt with and said, you're not allowed to be here. To that point, my tribe's Winter Nights celebration is tribe only. So for some of our affairs, when we have Yule or Sigrblot, right? The way that we do it is we invite others that are friends to the tribe, that are allies, that are welcome in our home and welcome to this place. Winter Nights is strictly cut off. It's tribe only. So in that way, we hold some of those traditions. Okay, but it makes good sense why they wouldn't want outsiders, and I allude to that. When it comes to taboos, and again, I'm guilty of this because I thought of taboos just being social. I said taboos change over time. Just because arch-heathens believed certain things were taboo at the time is not good enough reason for me to think they're still taboo now. Saying that they were the last ones to have divine contact is also not accurate to me. This is going back to this person's saying that why should we not mind the taboos of the arch-heathens if they were the last ones to have divine contact? So to that, I say that they were the last ones. It doesn't seem accurate to me because how can we honestly believe that the sacred have not interacted with the profane/mundane since the Viking Age or earlier? I've had my own experiences, which I clearly define as saying that they are UPG, and I know that confirmed to me the presence of the divine in my hearth cult, my individual cultic practices, and larger scale rituals, which have included people outside of my own tribe. I have felt the presence of the divine. I have, you know, and what is historically accurate source material anyway, other than what has just, proven through the test of time that, somebody saw something and felt something at one point in time. It was their UPG, and it just happens to be, it was 1,000 or more years ago, and so it turns into material because somebody wrote it down and we dug it up somewhere, or we found it in the library, and now all of a sudden it's historical fact. I could probably go around and around with conversations like that, which I love. But the fact of the matter is that, what I experience, I could write it down, and then in 100, 200, 300, 500, 1,000 years from now, people could dig that shit up and be like, oh man, back in 2020, back in the 21st century, man, these people were something else because they believed this, that, thing, and the other, because look at what we found written down on this piece of paper that we dug up. And I said, no one, no matter how much of a recon that they are, can convince me otherwise. Never say never, but I haven't met one yet. As for the nature and inspiration of the item, because he's asking, or they are asking, the nature and inspiration of the item, I said it lies heavily in my hearth cult practices, which leans in the realm of animism. Something that has existed in cultures around the world, not just Sami or others, or other indigenous Proto-Indo-European PIE peoples. The style of the item may reflect similarities to the Sami, but have no intention on doing so. It wasn't the intent for me to copy Sami aesthetics. So look, and this is kind of where, again, I get to the, am I a Norse pagan, right? So you've got this umbrella term paganism that's just, anybody that's, a polytheist, right? Like, you've got so many different branches of paganism. Celtic paganism, Germanic paganism, African paganism, Asian paganism, Shinto. I mean, you got so many different things, right? I mean, it's the umbrella term. Now, Norse paganism could be an umbrella under the umbrella, because you could be talking about Scandinavian, Icelandic heathenry. You could be talking about mainland Germanic Saxon heathenry. You could be talking about, a variety of flavors that get lumped into this just Norse paganism, right? So it's like the label thing really gets, the waters get murky when you start just generalizing things. So am I a Norse pagan? That's probably the easiest answer that I could give to somebody in terms of, well, what do you believe in? What's your religious practice? It's Norse paganism, but it's so much more than that, because what I said is how deeply rooted in animism my practices have evolved into, is evident in much of what I share publicly in terms of my thoughts, or where I go, or where I find my peace at, is in nature, right? I talk about my river walks. I talk about my own philia, the heron. I've shared, this thing that's hanging up, which you really can't see a whole lot of it, but it's literally a feather necklace with rib bones that my wife made. I mean, that's animistic as hell, man. You know. Again, is it my personal practices? Is it anything historically based in here? Well, I don't know, man. If you want to go back and you want to, blame the shaman of Bad Dürrenberg on the reason why we all wear bones and stuff now as Germanic pagans, as Norse heathens, as whatever the label we want to put onto it. Well, I guess you could say that there's your, historical source that they were used, or that they had that they were implemented in spiritual and religious practices. But at the end of the day, man, like, it's hard to put a label to this stuff. And I think that's one of the reasons why so many people just, want to get away from labels. And they want to get away from putting a sticker on it, putting a stamp on it, So, some more of the comments, right? You're going to see some of this posted up here on the screen now. Sorry for multi-posts and deletes because Facebook is la la la. Is it appropriate for mortals to break taboos that are of divine inspiration, in my opinion? So I didn't answer this question in the chat, or in the thread. the comment thread because, again, there's just so much here to digest, and I feel like this is easier for me. No, I don't think it's appropriate for us that exist in the profane space to just arbitrarily decide that things that were of a unacceptable nature religiously that applied then don't apply now. I don't think those sorts of things change. What I was mainly referring to were the taboos of a social nature, right? Because again, societies change, cultures evolve, and social taboos from 1,000, 1,500 years ago largely have no place here and now. So no, I don't think that it's wise or well to do to just arbitrarily decide that religious taboos, spiritual taboos, things that didn't work back then when dealing with the sacred, when dealing with the divine, don't carry over into now. Because again, it goes back to the whole Judeo religions, Muslims, Islam, Christianity. When it says in their sacred text to not do X, Y, Z, then it doesn't matter that it was written however many thousands of years ago. They believe it to be true and valid and stuff now. So to take that into consideration, to look at the bigger picture of things, no, I don't think that it's appropriate to break taboos of that nature, of divine or sacred context. To which they say, don't forget, when serious penalties, not just of a social nature, but a divine one for breaking taboos. Yeah, look, I'm not going to touch on the social taboos because social taboos, 1,500, 2,000, whatever years ago, we're not going to stone adulterers. We're not going to burn witches. We're not going to, put a scarlet letter on people. Like those things that were taboo back then, and the way that we respond to it now. I mean, times have changed, right? Things are just generally unacceptable to most societies. There are certain social taboos that even back then don't, that didn't age well. You know what I mean? Like, when it was shit back then, it's shit now. So, but he says he recalls a priest of Frey that who was in the lore, who was denied luck by the gods because he allowed his son, who was outlaw, into one of Frey's groves under arms, meaning he was wearing weapons and stuff. And at that time, that was, you don't enter sacred space with weapons, with iron, with that sort of thing. And we see that reflected now in a lot of pagan practices, right? I know a lot of people who, when they make sacred space, when they create sacred space, anything of an artificial or metal, even nature, right? No weapons, no blades, no iron, no this and that. Electronics technology is kept without of that space, and I agree with a lot of that. I think there's a place for that. This is an example of a taboo that exists for a reason. Sure, clearly ordained by the gods themselves. Should that change within the times? Again, I go back to the whole thing that if we look back and we see that there were clear barriers defined with how the gods were interacted with, conditions in which the gods were interacted upon, I don't think we should just arbitrarily, I want to key in on that, arbitrarily decide that it's not a good idea, right? Because what happens tomorrow or 10 years from now when you dig up something that suggests otherwise? We're basing all of this stuff off of the information that we have at hand. And as long as we recognize that, as long as we accept that, I think we're all in a position of being able to grow and with that information as we get it. Taboos are an important part of religiosity. Religious taboos, sure. Because again, they say, would a Muslim or Jewish man be free of any criticism from their fellows for eating pork when he doesn't have to? Again, there is divine law that says otherwise. These animals are unclean, la la la. I mean, I grew up Christian for several decades, couple of decades, 20 some odd years of my life. I, followed a more Christian path, and I lived that very devoutly especially in my youth and in my childhood, where we didn't eat certain vegetables and we didn't eat certain roots, we didn't eat certain things because of the interpretation that we got from the Bible, right? I mean, we didn't eat potatoes, we didn't eat tomatoes, didn't eat onions, you know? That's a whole other conversation for another time, but you want to get into taboos and religiosity. It was at a point of time where it was like, well, it's not just about right and wrong, it's about perfection. It's about fine-tuning ourselves to getting better in touch with the divine, God, whatever. So no, I think, uh, there is definite place for that. I had mentioned UPG. The person says, yes, exactly, that's UPG as far as facts are concerned. There is a huge gap in context with our higher divine. Ergo, the arch-heathens, from a theological perspective, are indeed the last to hold the apophany. But are they, though? Is it only because that's all we have is documented source material that suggests or that supports that? Was not their interactions with the divine at the time their UPG for them? That term didn't exist back then, but was it not UPG at the time? I contest, and I would say that it was, because when it comes to things that we can't see, that we can't tangibly, like, hey, John, come over here. You see what I see, right? It's this piece of paper that says blah blah blah. Yeah, I see that. Okay, good. We agree, right? Well, if it ain't that, and it's just, guys, I just saw this thing, I just experienced this thing. This is where I think things are at, and then everybody else is like, wow, that's profound. I want to experience that, right? And the next thing you know, all these oral traditions become traditions. Exactly, they become exactly that. It's now what this guy did or what those people did. Let's all of us do it. Let's find a way for it to fit into our, praxis of orthopraxy or whatever, and then it becomes historical material. It becomes source material. It becomes a thing that we're sitting here, 1,500, 2,000 years later or more, saying that that's how it should be done now because some guy, woman, whoever, some people in an ancient society that are long dead and gone experienced and they made it so. So, um, that's my stance on it. So he says, "Let me ask you: would you want to interact with a being that regularly disregards your taboos while claiming to live in a way that's in line with your culture and Thu? Thu is law. Thu is specifically law as defined in within heathen contexts, right? Somebody out here proved me wrong, right? Thu is tribal law. Quite oftentimes lines up with an overarching law, but you gotta look at the context of this thing. Thu was law at the time in the way that the world was built and in the way that society was functioning at the time. So my tribe's Thu or my tribe's customs and traditions aren't necessarily going to be the same as the next tribe's customs or traditions. There may be similarities, there may be overarching themes and enough stuff to suggest that there's a closeness to it, but the way that certain things were done in one region were not the same way things were done in another region. So to kind of lump it all into the same description, I don't know if that's what was intended, but that's what I'm understanding, is like all the gods, no matter where you are, right? The gods of Saxony are not the same gods of Scandinavia. Well, are they? Are they just named different things? And were those traditions not picked up from that region? And then their localized stuff became a part of the practices, and so therefore that Thu became unique to those people? You can't, I don't think that we can deduce that Like it'd be like, let's just say, I don't know, I'm from New York, right? I'm from New York and I live in Tennessee. Well, the way that we do things in New York is, you know, a certain way. Our social skills, our social construct is different in the part of New York where I'm from. I came to Tennessee, and I remember first time walking into a Walmart, and I get people talking to me that I've never met in my life, and I go, "Who the hell are you? Why are you talking to me?" Right? Social, differences. Just because I'm in a different place and I'm at a different time in my life doesn't make it wrong. It's just that's foreign to me. It doesn't. But I learned from living in this area and from being in the state and from being in this region that, well, that's just normal. That's their social construct. That's the way these people do things. And so now that I'm here in their space, it's, and again, I'm not trying to compare the dealings of the profane humans with the dealings of the gods. I get it. There's a big difference there. But when the comments made is, would I want to interact with a being that is regularly disrespectful of my taboos? Well, why do I have those taboos? Again, it's apples and oranges, man. Like I'm just a guy. I'm just a human being. I'm not in the mindset. I don't think the way the divine think. I don't think the way the sacred think. None of us do. All right? Putting that out there. We're all humans. We're all living in profane space and time. I have actually had experiences myself that I will put on the table as being 100% UPG, but I have heard the voice of Odin. I have seen the faces of the gods. That is UPG. Anybody wants to cut and clip whatever, that's UPG for me. I have seen what I've seen. I've heard what I've heard. None of this really matters. The taboos, to me, religious taboos, again, I get it. I understand the importance of the context that exists there. You know, don't do certain things because it makes the gods mad. Well, or it makes the divine mad, or it upsets the divine. We're going to lose our luck if we do X, Y, Z. Yeah, that was the way that they viewed the world then in that region. You're talking about a priest of Frey. Freyr, very, very big time with the Swedes, right? They weren't uh, they weren't big into, like, I mean, here I go again, trying to not prove a point, but to make a point that, the Ynglinga saga, you hear names like Odin and Balder and so on and so forth. But like this, we know that the Swedes were big with Freyr. Like Frey, Njord, like they had a big, you know, you want to call the Vanir tribes of the gods. Like they were very important to the Swedes. So it makes sense that if, you had a priest, a Gothi, whatever, of Freyr that messed up and had a son that did something that was against the taboo at the time and was outlaw, and then you just allow this person to walk into a grove dedicated to your deity under arms, you damn right that people be like, well, now we all of our Cheerios just got pissed in. Thanks, dude. You just ruined it for all of us. Now we gotta, kill X amount of sheep. Now we gotta burn X amount of barrels of grain, or we gotta do all these things to appeal to our higher powers, whatever, and make it right, set the balance back into order. So I don't know, man. If the question is, would you want to interact with a being that regularly disregards your taboos? As a human, I invite people over to my home to interact with me, and under the sovereignty of my hearth, it is expected that they abide by these rules. And so, to that degree, I think that the people of the time understood that that was expected of people, and so they probably extended that same belief into the realm of the divine as well. What contact? Let's see here. RT happens on the God's terms. Sorry. Furthermore, you seem to. Okay, let me back up. I'm rambling on literally into parts of the conversation that I haven't touched upon yet. Would you abstain from such an offensive person? Being that regularly disregards your taboos while claiming to live in a way that's in line with your culture, or would you abstain from such an offensive person? I would try to figure out why they thought that way. Hey, why do you feel that way? What can I learn from you? Is it a cultural thing? Is it something that? Because look, guys, man, I was raised to believe that certain things were taboo. Piercings, tattoos, right? Taboo. You don't do it. Why? Because the Bible says you don't mark your bodies over this, that, thing, and the other. Well, I threw that shit out the window, of course, when I abandoned Christianity. But then I realized that doesn't even make sense, because look at some of the things that existed at the time, cultures that have, a place in that practice, right? They have where your skin is marked and you have piercings and things, and that's part of their social norm. It's not taboo for them. Well, it was taboo because of, whatever priest or whatever, person connected to the divine says it was, but does it really matter? I don't have that answer. I don't live in the headspace or the time and space of the divine. All right. So furthermore, you seem to believe, he says, or they say that you furthermore seem to believe in the difference in profane space and sacred space, as the arch heathens did. I do. Would that conclusion not inform you that the epiphany happens on the God's terms, where contact automatic and constant by virtue of merely being human? I don't think there would be a distinction between holy and profane space like we saw it in the ancients. Do I disagree? I'm trying to understand the context of the question here, but I do believe that we exist in profane space, the gods exist in sacred space. There are times when we can kind of break through the barrier. Certain people have an easier time doing it than others, and there are ways to be able to do that. We're not limited to just existing in profane space and time. We can leave our ethereal bodies. We can transcend that, and we can become part of, at least temporarily, the divine's space and time. He says, I don't think there would be a distinction between holy and profane space like we saw in the ancients. Do I disagree? I guess I disagree. I think there is a definite separation. I think when we work our various rituals, right, we are existing in profane space, but we are trying to create a space that is separate from the profane. We are creating barriers. We are creating a space that invites the divine in, right? So those measures, those methods, whether historically drawn from or not, are our attempts at connecting to the sacred. I think this comment about UPG says UPG isn't up for discussion as it means nothing to the grander themes of the religion that we all are reconstructing. How does it not? How does UPG not play a factor here as long as we're defining it as such? Right? It's all speculative. Right? There's nobody that we can sit in front of and talk to right now that knows how shit was done 1,200, 1,500, 2,000 years ago. There isn't. We're reconstructing things based off of archaeological and scientific evidence, sources, materials, things that people have unearthed. To come up with educated reasonings as to why or how or what, UPG should be up for discussion, because there has to be. I mean, it has to be. I mentioned earlier, I haven't found anybody, no matter how court of a reconstructionist they are, that can convince me otherwise. How can UPG not be up for discussion? How can we not talk about these things? Because I'm not trying to erase all of the historical stuff. I'm trying to bring to light things that were happening at the time that were likely just someone or someone's, like multiple people's UPG that just somehow happened to make it into the record books. You know, they made it. And how much of what we're doing right now is going to become the same thing in however many years down the road. There's a lot to all of this, and guys, I've been rambling now myself for over an hour, and I didn't realize that it was going to go this deep or go this far. So there may be a part 2 to this. If you guys want to hear more and you guys want to talk more about this, you know, I think that it would be best to just break it off right now. But let me know in the comments, right? Because again, so much of what I do is circulated around what you guys share and what you guys talk about. Whether you know it or not, your thoughts and your comments mean a lot to me. And it is the fodder, it is the fire, it is the fuel. I don't mean fodder in like a disrespectful way, but it is the fuel for a lot of these episodes. So part 2, you decide. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of this podcast and if you would like to hear the rest of it all, because there is a little bit more content that I could go through about all this. I appreciate all of you listening and watching today, as always. If you liked it, give the video, give the podcast a heart, thumbs up, upvote it, do whatever it is that the various platforms that this is on suggests for you to do. Share it around, you know. Definitely appreciate it. Until we talk again, may the gods continue to notice you, and may your ancestors smile.